You can't silence me, I know my rights.
She was kicked out of her seat, humiliated in front of dozens of passengers, and accused of being a thief. But what the flight attendant didn't know about this 9-year-old girl would destroy her career forever and spark a movement that would change an entire industry. This is the true story of Maya Williams, and I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at air travel the same way again. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Chicago. Maya Williams woke up with butterflies in her stomach, the kind of excitement that only a 9-year-old can feel when something extraordinary is about to happen. She bounced out of bed, her colorful beaded braids clicking together as she moved, and ran to her closet to pull out her favorite purple hoodie. Today wasn't just any day. Today, Maya was going to fly alone for the very first time. You might be wondering why a 9-year-old would be flying alone, and that's where Maya's story gets beautiful. Maya had just won first place in the regional youth science competition. Her project on artificial intelligence and bias detection had impressed judges so much that she'd been selected to represent her school at the national competition in Atlanta. And her grandmother, the woman who had always believed in her dreams, had invited her to stay for a week to prepare. But Maya wasn't just any 9-year-old. 2 years earlier, she had lost her father, Margaret Williams, a decorated military veteran who had served 3 tours overseas. His death had shattered their small family, leaving Maya and her mother, Dr. Aisha Williams, to pick up the pieces of their broken hearts. Aisha was a cardiologist, a woman who saved lives every single day, but she couldn't save the one that mattered most. And in those 2 years since her husband's death, she'd watched her daughter transform from a bubbly, talkative little girl into someone quieter, more observant, more careful with her words. But Maya had also become something else. She'd become strong, resilient, determined to make her father proud. That morning, as Maya came down for breakfast, her mother was already in the kitchen, stress-baking blueberry muffins at 6 in the morning. Aisha's hands were covered in flour, but her eyes were red-rimmed, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Letting her baby girl fly alone across the country felt like ripping off a piece of her heart and sending it into the sky. Maya sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs that didn't quite touch the floor, clutching her science project notebook like it was made of gold. Inside that notebook were months of research, carefully drawn diagrams, and notes in her neat, precise handwriting. She'd worked so hard on this project, staying up late after school, asking her mother endless questions about how computers learn, how patterns form, how bias creeps into systems without anyone even noticing. Her project had asked a simple but powerful question. If computers learn from humans and humans have biases, don't computers learn to be biased too? At 9 years old, Maya Williams was already asking questions that most adults never considered. Aisha placed a warm muffin in front of her daughter and sat down, taking both of Maya's small hands in hers. Her voice was soft but serious, the voice she used when something really mattered. She told Maya that today was going to be a big day, full of new experiences and maybe some challenges too. She reminded her daughter about all the things they'd practiced, the safety rules, the emergency contacts programmed into her phone, the special lanyard with her name and flight information that she'd wear around her neck. But then Aisha said something that made Maya roll her eyes. She started talking about being careful, about being aware, about how sometimes people might treat her differently because of how she looked. Maya, with all the confidence of a child who'd grown up in a diverse neighborhood and a loving home, laughed it off. She actually said, "Mom, it's 2026, not 1960. Things are different now." And oh, how Aisha wished that were true. She looked at her daughter, at those bright, hopeful eyes that still saw the world as fundamentally good, and her heart ached. Because Aisha knew better. She'd lived through her own experiences of discrimination. The assumptions when she walked into a patient's room and they asked when the real doctor would arrive. The times she'd been followed in stores. The microaggressions that accumulated like paper cuts until they felt like gaping wounds. She wanted to protect Maya from all of that, to wrap her in bubble wrap and keep her innocent and hopeful forever. But she also knew that her daughter needed to learn to navigate the world as it was, not as it should be. So Aisha pulled Maya close, kissed her forehead, and told her something important. She said that being prepared wasn't about expecting the worst, it was about being ready for anything. She told Maya that she was strong, that she came from a line of strong black women who had faced down much worse than a plane ride, and that her father's courage ran through her veins. Maya fingered the dog tags hanging under her shirt, the ones that had belonged to her father. She wore them every day close to her heart. They were her reminder that bravery wasn't about not being scared. It was about doing what needed to be done even when your hands shook. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was quiet. Aisha kept glancing at Maya in the rearview mirror, memorizing her face like she might forget it in the few hours they'd be apart. Maya stared out the window watching Chicago roll by, her notebook clutched to her chest. She was excited, yes, but she was also nervous. Not about the flight itself, but about doing this alone. About proving to her mother, and maybe to herself, that she was ready for this kind of independence. At the airport, Aisha walked Maya through every single step. Security checkpoint? Aisha was there, showing her how to put her bag on the conveyor belt, how to walk through the scanner with confidence. Gate finding? They walked the route twice, with Aisha pointing out landmarks and signs. Even bathroom locations got a full tour. Aisha wasn't taking any chances. At the gate, reality hit both of them at once. This was really happening. Aisha knelt down to Maya's level, straightening her daughter's purple hoodie, adjusting her braids, doing all the small, unnecessary things that mothers do when they're trying not to cry. She reminded Maya one more time about all the rules, all the safety precautions, all the what-ifs they'd discussed. And then she said something that Maya would remember for the rest of her life. She said, "Baby, you are brilliant, you are worthy, and you belong anywhere you choose to be. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small. Your father didn't die protecting this country so that his daughter would shrink herself to make others comfortable. You stand tall, you hear me?" Maya nodded, tears forming in her own eyes now, and hugged her mother so tight that Aisha could barely breathe. And then the gate agent called for boarding, and it was time. Time to let go. Time to trust. Time to watch her baby girl walk down that jetway alone. Maya turned back once, waving at her mother with a brave smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And then she was gone, swallowed up by the tunnel leading to the plane. Here's what Maya didn't know as she walked onto that aircraft. Her mother had done more than just book a flight. Aisha had saved for months to buy Maya a first-class ticket. It wasn't about luxury or spoiling her daughter. It was about giving Maya something special, a reward for all her hard work, a celebration of her achievement. It was about showing her daughter that she deserved the best, that her success was worth celebrating, that first class wasn't just for other people, it was for brilliant young girls who worked hard and dreamed big. Maya found her seat 2A right at the front of the plane. A window seat in first class. She'd never sat in first class before. The seats were huge, covered in soft leather that felt like butter under her fingers. There was so much legroom that her feet dangled freely, not even close to touching the floor. She carefully stowed her backpack under the seat in front of her, keeping her precious science notebook on her lap. She put on her noise-canceling headphones, the ones her grandmother Margaret had given her for her 9th birthday. They were expensive, top of the line, because Grandma Margaret believed in buying quality things that lasted. Maya didn't know that those headphones cost $400. She just knew they made her feel grown up and helped her focus. As other passengers boarded, Maya watched them with curiosity. An Asian man in an expensive suit sat in 1A, immediately opening his laptop and beginning to work. His name was Robert Chin, a tech executive and attorney, the kind of man who noticed everything and said little until it mattered. A kind-looking elderly white woman with silver hair settled into 3C, pulling out a book and reading glasses. Patricia Morrison had been a teacher for 40 years, a civil rights educator who had marched with her students in the 1960s, and she still carried that fire for justice in her bones. A black businessman in his 40s took 4B, nodding politely at Maya as he passed. Marcus Thompson had climbed the corporate ladder the hard way, and he knew discrimination when he saw it. A younger white guy with a camera around his neck claimed 2C, across the aisle from Maya, already looking around for interesting things to film. Brad Newcomb was an influencer always hunting for the next viral moment, but he had no idea he was about to witness something that would define his entire platform. And then she appeared. Jessica Parker. The head flight attendant. Jessica was in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a perfect bun, makeup flawless, uniform crisp and pressed. She'd been flying for 20 years, and it showed in the way she moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see the tightness around her eyes, the bitter set of her mouth, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she greeted passengers. Jessica Parker was having the worst year of her life. Her divorce had been finalized just last month, and her ex-husband had gotten almost everything. The house, most of their savings, even the dog. She was living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, watching her dreams of early retirement evaporate. And to make matters worse, she'd been passed over for promotion again. 20 years of service, and younger flight attendants with half her experience were being promoted to management positions while she stayed stuck in the same role, watching time and opportunity slip away. She'd become bitter. Resentful. She looked at the world through eyes that only saw unfairness, that only noticed what she didn't have instead of what she did. And somewhere along the way that bitterness had calcified into something uglier. Into biases she didn't even recognize in herself. Into assumptions about who belonged where, about who deserved what, about who fit and who didn't. So when Jessica Parker walked through first class that day, greeting passengers with her professional smile, handing out champagne and warm towels to the adults, something shifted in her expression when she reached row 2. When she saw Maya Williams sitting in seat 2A, this small black girl with beaded braids and a purple hoodie, something in Jessica's face changed. Her smile tightened. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. And when she spoke, her voice had an edge that hadn't been there moments before. She called Maya sweetheart, in a tone that didn't sound sweet at all, and asked if she was sure she was in the right seat. Not, welcome aboard, like she'd said to the other passengers. Not, can I get you anything, or, how are you today? Just a pointed question about whether Maya belonged there. Maya, polite as she'd been taught to be, pulled out her boarding pass and showed it to Jessica. C2A. First class. Her name printed right there in black and white. Jessica looked at the boarding pass for a long moment, her jaw tight, and then she said, okay then, in a voice that suggested it was anything but okay. No welcome. No smile. Just that loaded silence that made Maya's stomach twist into knots. Marcus Thompson looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing. He'd heard that tone before. He knew exactly what was happening. Patricia Morrison peered over her reading glasses, her expression troubled. She'd seen discrimination in all its forms and she recognized it now. Robert Chin paused his typing, his lawyer's instincts activated. And Brad Newcomb, well, his hand drifted toward his camera. He had a feeling this was going to be a story worth documenting. But Maya? Maya just settled back into her seat, trying to make herself smaller, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling that had settled over her like a cold blanket. She told herself she was imagining things, that the flight attendant was just busy, that everything was fine. She had no idea that everything was about to go terribly, horribly wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Amanda Rodriguez was running through her pre-flight checklist with her co-pilot, James Walsh. Amanda was a 15-year veteran, a Latina woman who'd fought her own battles to earn her captain's wings in an industry that hadn't always welcomed her. She was thorough, professional, and had zero tolerance for anything that compromised safety or dignity on her aircraft. James was young, eager, on his first year with a major airline, still in awe of every takeoff. Neither of them had any idea what was brewing in the cabin behind them. The plane pushed back from the gate right on time. The engines roared to life. Maya pressed her face against the window, watching Chicago get smaller beneath her, and felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. She was doing it. She was really flying alone. The seatbelt sign dinged off about 20 minutes into the flight, and that's when Jessica Parker's true colors started to show. Beverage service began, and Jessica transformed into the picture of gracious hospitality for some passengers. She leaned in close to the businessman in 1A, asking what she could get him with a warm smile. She laughed at a joke from the man in 4C. She offered the woman in 3C a choice between champagne, wine, or a cocktail, listing options like she was reading a menu at a fine restaurant. And then she got to Maya. Her entire demeanor shifted. The warmth drained from her voice. She stood over Maya and said one word, water? Not, what would you like to drink? Not, we have juice, soda, water. Just water, in a tone that wasn't really a question at all. It was a statement, an assumption, a dismissal. Maya looked up at her, confused by the sudden coldness, and said politely, "May I please have apple juice and some pretzels?" Jessica's eye roll was subtle, but it was there. Maya saw it. So did Marcus Thompson. So did Patricia Morrison. Jessica sighed like Maya had just asked her to perform an impossible task and said, "We don't have apple juice in first class. This isn't coach." The words hung in the air like a slap. Maya's face grew hot with embarrassment. She mumbled, "Oh, okay. Water is fine then." But Marcus Thompson wasn't about to let it slide. He leaned forward and said, "Excuse me, but I just watched you serve apple juice to the child in 5A not 3 minutes ago." Jessica's face flushed red. She turned to Marcus with barely concealed irritation and said, "Sir, please mind your business." Patricia Morrison set down her book. Her voice was calm but firm, with that southern accent that carried the weight of decades of fighting for what was right. She said, "I don't believe this gentleman is out of line. I'd like to know why this child is being treated differently than the others." Jessica's professional mask was cracking now. She forced a tight smile and said, "Ma'am, I'm managing this cabin, and I don't appreciate passengers telling me how to do my job." Robert Chin closed his laptop. He pulled out a business card and held it up so Jessica could see it. He said quietly, "I'm an attorney. And what you're doing right now could be considered discrimination. I suggest you reconsider your approach." Jessica snatched a bottle of apple juice from her cart and practically threw it on Maya's tray table. No cup. No napkin. No pretzels. Just the bottle, delivered with a look that could freeze fire. Then she pushed her cart down the aisle without another word. Maya sat there, staring at the bottle of apple juice, fighting back tears. She'd done something wrong, but she didn't know what. She was trying so hard to be good, to be polite, to not cause any trouble. But somehow she'd become a problem anyway. Before we continue, if you're already feeling something about Maya's story, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is going to shock you. This is just the beginning. About 30 minutes later, Maya needed to use the restroom. It was a simple thing, a basic human need, but even that was about to become a humiliation. She unbuckled her seatbelt and walked toward the first-class lavatory at the front of the plane. The light was green, indicating it was vacant and available. But before Maya could reach the door, Jessica Parker appeared out of nowhere, stepping directly into her path. Jessica held up her hand like a crossing guard stopping traffic and said loudly, "That bathroom is out of order. You'll need to use the one in coach." Maya looked at the green light, then back at Jessica, confused. She said softly, "But the light is green. Doesn't that mean it's working?" Jessica's voice got louder, sharp enough that other passengers turned to look. "I said it's out of order. Do you have a hearing problem?" Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Passengers were staring now. Some looked sympathetic. Some looked uncomfortable. Some just looked away, pretending they hadn't heard anything. Maya's face burned with shame as she turned and walked toward the back of the plane, past row after row of passengers in coach who watched this little first-class passenger make the walk of shame to their bathroom. But Robert Chen had seen the whole thing. And he'd just used that very bathroom not 10 minutes earlier. It had been working perfectly fine. He stood up, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, and his voice carried through the cabin. "Excuse me, but I just used that restroom. It's working fine." Jessica whirled around, and for a moment her professional mask slipped completely. Pure anger flashed across her face. She pointed at Robert and said, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to sit down, or I'll have to report you for being disruptive." Robert didn't sit down. He said, "Report me for what?" "Telling the truth." Brad Newcomb had his phone out now, recording everything. This was no longer just uncomfortable. This was wrong. Clearly, obviously, undeniably wrong. Maya made it to the coach bathroom, tears streaming down her face. She locked herself in that tiny space and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since boarding. She looked at herself in the mirror, at her red eyes and trembling chin, and whispered to herself, "I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong." But doubt crept in anyway. Maybe she didn't belong in first class. Maybe the flight attendant was right. Maybe she should have just stayed quiet and accepted the water without asking for anything else. Maybe. She touched the dog tags under her shirt and thought about her father. About how he'd taught her to stand up for herself. About how he'd told her that her voice mattered. About how he'd said that the world would try to make her small, but she should never, ever let it. Maya dried her tears, lifted her chin, and walked back to her seat. She wasn't going to shrink. Not today. When she got back to row 2, Patricia Morrison reached across the aisle and gently squeezed her hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That one gesture said everything. "I see you. You're not alone. You didn't deserve that." But Jessica Parker wasn't done. Not even close. Lunch service began about an hour into the flight, and this was when things went from uncomfortable to absolutely outrageous. Jessica pushed her cart through first class, announcing the meal options with a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a choice of herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables or filet mignon with garlic mashed potatoes. Both meals come with a side salad, fresh bread, and your choice of dessert." She took orders from each passenger, writing them down carefully, making sure everyone got exactly what they wanted. The businessman in 1A chose the salmon. Patricia Morrison asked for the filet medium rare. Marcus Thompson ordered the salmon as well. And then Jessica got to Maya. Without asking, without offering choices, without even making eye contact, Jessica reached under her cart and pulled out a meal tray. But it wasn't the first-class meal. It was a coach meal, the kind that comes in a plastic wrapper with a sandwich and a bag of chips. She slammed it down on Maya's tray table and said, "Here." Maya stared at the tray in confusion. She looked at the beautiful meals being served to other passengers, then at her sad little sandwich and said softly, "I'm sorry, but aren't we supposed to get the same meals?" Jessica's response was venomous. This is what we have available for you. That was it. That was the moment Marcus Thompson had had enough. He stood up and his voice boomed through the cabin. This is completely unacceptable. This child paid for a first-class ticket, and you're serving her a coach meal while everyone else gets the premium service? I'm calling for the head flight attendant right now. Jessica turned to him with a smug smile and said, I am the head flight attendant on this flight. So unless you'd like to be removed for being disruptive, I suggest you sit down and mind your own business. Patricia Morrison stood up too. Her voice was shaking, not with fear but with righteous anger. Young lady, I taught for 40 years and I know discrimination when I see it. What you're doing to this child is shameful and illegal. Jessica's mask shattered completely. She snapped back, Ma'am, perhaps you should mind your business too, or you'll be joining him on the no-fly list. The cabin erupted. Passengers started talking over each other. Some were defending Maya. Some were telling everyone to calm down. Some were filming. It was chaos. And in the middle of it all sat Maya, staring at that coach meal, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her entire life. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't been rude. She hadn't done anything except exist in a space where someone had decided she didn't belong. She opened the plastic wrapper with shaking hands, pulled out the chicken sandwich and took a bite. She didn't taste it. She was too busy trying not to cry again, trying to focus on her science notebook, trying to disappear into herself. That's when Jessica noticed the headphones. Maya had taken them off during the meal service and set them on the armrest beside her. They were nice headphones, expensive-looking, noise-canceling, top of the line. The kind that cost $400 retail. And Jessica's brain made a leap that revealed just how deep her bias ran. She stopped her cart, stared at those headphones, and her internal monologue went something like this. How does this kid afford those? There's no way. Someone probably bought them with fraudulent credit cards. Or maybe she stole them. Yeah, that's probably it. These kids always have expensive things they can't afford. She didn't think these thoughts consciously. She didn't say to herself, I'm being racist. But that's exactly what it was. The automatic assumption that a black child with something nice must have obtained it through dishonest means. The inability to imagine that Maya had a grandmother who loved her and bought her nice things. The refusal to consider that this child might actually deserve and rightfully own those headphones. Jessica's voice cut through the cabin noise, loud enough for everyone to hear. Excuse me, young lady, where did you get those headphones? The cabin went silent. Everyone turned to look. Maya was confused. My grandmother gave them to me for my birthday. Jessica crossed her arms. I'm going to need you to show me a receipt. Time seemed to stop. Marcus Thompson's mouth fell open. Patricia Morrison gasped. Robert Chen's hand moved to his phone. Brad Newcomb's camera was already rolling. Maya's voice was small and shaking. I don't have a receipt. They were a gift. My grandma bought them for my 9th birthday. Jessica leaned in, invading Maya's space, and said with absolute confidence, Those are $400 headphones. I find it very suspicious that a child flying alone would have them without proof of purchase. For all I know, you could have stolen them from the airport shop. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Marcus Thompson exploded. He shot out of his seat and his voice thundered through the plane. Are you seriously accusing this child of being a thief? A 9-year-old child. Patricia Morrison was on her feet too, pointing her finger at Jessica. This is disgraceful. You should be ashamed of yourself. Robert Chen was already typing on his phone, documenting everything, preparing for the legal storm he knew was coming. And Brad Newcomb? He turned his camera to face the cabin and spoke directly to his viewers. You're all witnessing this. This flight attendant just accused a child of stealing because she has nice headphones. This is going viral, lady. The whole world is about to see what you're doing. Other passengers were chiming in now. A woman from row 5 called out, This is ridiculous. Leave that baby alone. A man from row 7 shouted, Someone call the airline. This is discrimination. But there were other voices too. A middle-aged white woman muttered, Everyone's so sensitive these days. She's just doing her job. A businessman near the back said, If people would just follow the rules, there wouldn't be problems. Jessica, feeling cornered and defensive, made the worst mistake she could possibly make. She grabbed the intercom and said loudly, If you people don't calm down, I'll have the captain turn this plane around. You people. Those 2 words. Marcus Thompson's eyes went wide. You people? Really? Did you really just say that? Jessica realized what had slipped out, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. I meant disruptive passengers. Don't twist my words. But it was too late. Everyone had heard it. Everyone knew exactly what she'd meant. Maya sat frozen in her seat, tears streaming down her face, clutching her father's dog tags under her shirt. She'd never felt so humiliated, so helpless, so small in her entire life. All she'd wanted was to visit her grandmother and compete in her science competition. Instead, she'd been treated like a criminal, like she didn't belong, like her very existence was somehow offensive. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. She sent a text to her mother, "Mom, the flight attendant is being mean to me. She called me disruptive and accused me of stealing my headphones. I'm scared." 3,000 miles away, in the middle of performing a delicate cardiac procedure, Dr. Aisha Williams' phone buzzed in her locker. She wouldn't see that message for another 45 minutes. But when she did, the entire airline was going to learn what happened when you mess with a mother's child. Jessica retreated to the galley, but she wasn't done making bad decisions. She picked up the phone and called the cockpit. Captain Amanda Rodriguez answered. "Yes." Jessica's voice was tight and agitated. "Captain, we have a situation. We have a disruptive minor in first class who's refusing to follow instructions. Multiple passengers are getting agitated. I may need security to meet us at the gate." Amanda's voice was calm and professional. "Is the child being violent or threatening?" Jessica hesitated. "No, but she's being non-compliant and argumentative, and she has suspicious property that she can't provide documentation for." Amanda's eyes narrowed. Something about this didn't sound right. Suspicious property? What are you talking about? Jessica explained about the headphones, about how the child couldn't provide a receipt, about how the other passengers were being disruptive in the child's defense. With each word, Amanda's jaw got tighter. When Jessica finished, Amanda said slowly, "I'll come back when we reach stable cruising altitude. Don't do anything else until I get there." She hung up the phone and turned to her co-pilot. "James, take the controls. I need to deal with something in the cabin." In the galley, Jessica was talking to Stephanie, the junior flight attendant who'd been watching everything unfold with growing horror. Stephanie, barely 23 years old and new to the job, whispered urgently, "Jessica, maybe we should just leave her alone. This is getting really bad." Jessica snapped back, "That kid doesn't belong in first class. Someone probably used points or got an upgrade. She's making the other passengers uncomfortable." Stephanie looked through the gap in the curtain at the cabin, at Marcus Thompson comforting Maya, at Patricia Morrison glaring daggers at the galley, at Robert Chin taking notes, at Brad still filming. She said quietly, "Actually, they're uncomfortable with you, not her." Jessica's face went red. She was in too deep now, her pride and her bias tangled up so tight she couldn't separate them anymore. Maya, meanwhile, had overheard the word disruptive minor when Jessica made the call. She realized Jessica had called about her. Called her disruptive. Called her a problem. Her hands trembled as she stared at her phone, at the message she'd sent her mother. She felt so alone, so helpless. She was 30,000 feet in the air with nowhere to go and no one to protect her. Except she wasn't alone. Not really. Marcus Thompson leaned across the aisle and said gently, "Hey, sweetheart. You doing okay?" Maya shook her head, not trusting herself to speak without crying. Marcus continued, his voice warm and fatherly, "I want you to know something. You didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. That woman is the problem, not you. You hear me?" Patricia Morrison reached over and took Maya's hand. "Baby girl, I've been alive a long time and I've seen this same ugliness in 1,000 different forms. But I want you to remember something. Her hatred doesn't define you. Your grace and dignity in the face of it? That defines you." Robert Chin added, "Maya, I'm going to make sure this doesn't just disappear. What's happening to you is illegal and there will be consequences." And Brad, still recording, said, 2 million people are watching this right now, Maya. The whole world sees you. The whole world is on your side." Maya looked around at these strangers who had become her defenders, and something shifted inside her. The shame started to lift, replaced by something else. Not anger exactly, but determination. Her father's voice echoed in her head, "Stand up even when your knees shake." She wiped her tears, lifted her chin and pulled out her phone again. This time she texted her grandmother. Margaret Williams was at home in Atlanta, preparing her house for Maya's arrival when her phone chimed. She read the message once, then again, and her face transformed from warm grandmother to the federal judge she'd been for 25 years. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Richard, it's Margaret Williams. We need to talk." On the other end of the line, Richard Hartman, the CEO of the airline, felt his blood run cold. "Judge Williams? This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" Margaret's voice could have cut glass. My granddaughter is on flight 447. I assume you're aware of the situation? Richard was already pulling up his computer, searching for flight 447, his hands shaking slightly. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Your Honor. Let me check our systems. Margaret said coldly, let me help you. Your head flight attendant has spent the last hour and a half discriminating against a 9-year-old black girl. She's been denied service, forced to use coach facilities while in first class, served inferior meals, accused of theft, and labeled disruptive for having the audacity to exist in a seat her mother paid for. And all of this is being live-streamed to millions of people as we speak. Richard's assistant was frantically pulling up social media on a tablet. She turned it toward him and he saw Brad's video already at 3 million views and climbing. The comments were brutal. The hashtag Justice for Maya was trending number 2 in the United States. His face went pale. Judge Williams, I assure you I'm just learning about this. This is not reflective of our company values, and we will take immediate action. Margaret's voice was ice. Richard, I sat on the federal bench for 25 years. I've seen discrimination cases destroy companies bigger than yours. You have until that plane lands in Atlanta to have a comprehensive plan in place, or I will have one for you. And mine will involve lawyers, federal regulators, and enough media attention to bankrupt your stock. Richard was sweating now. Of course, absolutely. We'll have senior management at the gate. We'll issue a full apology. We'll compensate. Margaret cut him off. Richard, I don't want compensation. I want change. Real change. Systemic change. Now get your people moving because that plane lands in 2 hours and I expect you to be ready. She hung up and immediately called her daughter. Aisha had just finished her surgery and was checking her phone when it rang. She saw her mother's name and answered, Mama, I just saw Maya's text. What's happening? Margaret told her everything. And with each word, Aisha felt rage building in her chest like a storm. Her hands gripped the phone so tight her knuckles went white. When Margaret finished, Aisha said in a voice that was terrifyingly calm, I'm getting on the next flight to Atlanta. And when I get there, that airline is going to wish they'd never sold us a ticket. Back on the plane, Captain Amanda Rodriguez left the cockpit and walked into first class. She was a small woman, barely 5'4", but she carried herself with an authority that made people step aside. She scanned the cabin, taking in the scene with trained eyes. She saw Maya immediately, small and frightened in seat 2A, surrounded by protective passengers. She saw Jessica in the galley, flustered and red-faced. She saw the tension crackling through the air like electricity. Amanda walked directly to Jessica and said quietly but firmly, Galley? Now. They stepped into the small galley space and Amanda closed the curtain. But the cabin was quiet enough that raised voices carried anyway. Amanda's voice was low and controlled, but everyone could hear the fury underneath. What the hell were you thinking? Jessica, defensive, said, that child was being disruptive and... Amanda cut her off. A 9-year-old child was being disruptive? Or were you being discriminatory? Jessica's face flushed. I was doing my job. That kid doesn't belong in first class. I was just... Amanda's voice rose. Just what? Just profiling a child based on the color of her skin? Just creating a hostile environment? Just violating about 6 different federal laws? Jessica was stammering now. You don't understand. I've been with this airline for 20 years. I know when something's not right. Amanda stepped closer. What's not right is your behavior. You're grounded the second we land. You will not interact with another passenger for the rest of this flight. And you're being reported for discrimination, creating an unsafe environment, and conduct unbecoming a flight attendant. Jessica's eyes went wide with panic. You can't do that. I need this job. My divorce. I just lost everything. Amanda's expression didn't soften one bit. You should have thought about that before you harassed a child. Now go sit in the jump seat and don't move until we land. Jessica tried one more time. Please, this is all being blown out of proportion. She's fine. Amanda pointed to the jump seat. Sit down. Now. Jessica stumbled to the jump seat, tears running down her face, and it finally hit her what she'd done. The full weight of it. She'd let her bitterness and her biases destroy her career, her reputation, everything. And for what? Because a little black girl had the audacity to sit in first class? Amanda walked over to Maya and knelt down beside her seat so they were eye to eye. Her voice was gentle now, all the hardness gone. Hi, sweetheart. My name is Captain Rodriguez. I'm so sorry for what happened to you today. Maya looked at her with red, swollen eyes and whispered, Am I in trouble? Amanda's heart shattered. This child, who had been abused and discriminated against for over an hour, thought she was the one in trouble. No, baby. No. You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. You have every right to be in that seat, and you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I'm sorry we failed you today. Maya's lower lip trembled. I just wanted to visit my grandma and do my science competition. Amanda reached out and gently squeezed Maya's hand. And you're going to do that. And you're going to be amazing. But first, how would you like to come see the cockpit? Maya's eyes widened. Really? Amanda smiled. Really? When it's safe to do so, I'll come get you. How does that sound? Maya nodded, the first real smile breaking through since the flight began. Amanda stood and addressed the entire first-class cabin. She picked up the intercom and her voice filled the plane. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to personally and sincerely apologize for the unprofessional and discriminatory behavior you witnessed today. This airline has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind, and the flight attendant responsible has been removed from duty. The young passenger in question did absolutely nothing wrong, and I want to make that crystal clear. We will be conducting a full investigation, and I assure you, there will be serious consequences. Thank you for your patience and for standing up for what's right. The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers were clapping, some were crying, and Maya felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the problem. She never had been. Amanda personally brought Maya the first-class meal, the herb-crusted salmon, along with every dessert option they had. She upgraded her to unlimited everything for the rest of the flight. And she made sure Maya knew beyond any doubt that she mattered. But while Amanda was taking care of things on the plane, a hurricane was forming on the ground. Brad's video had exploded. 5 million views. 10 million. 15 million. The comments were pouring in by the thousands. Celebrities were tweeting about it. News outlets were picking up the story. Major media figures were demanding statements from the airline. The hashtag Justice for Maya was trending #1 worldwide. Not just in the United States. Worldwide. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination. Black parents were posting about the talk they have to give their children. Flight attendants were coming forward with horror stories about colleagues like Jessica. Lawyers were offering pro bono representation. Civil rights organizations were preparing statements. It was a firestorm. And it was growing by the minute. At airline headquarters, it was absolute chaos. The crisis management team had been activated. The legal department was in emergency session. The PR team was trying to draft a statement that wouldn't make things worse. And the stock price was dropping in real time as investors saw the viral video and panicked. Richard Hartman, the CEO, was in his office watching the video for the 10th time, and feeling sicker with each viewing. He called his executive team together. I want senior management at the gate when that plane lands. I want our best customer relations people there. I want security to escort Jessica Parker from the airport before the passengers deplane. And I want a full internal review of our training programs, hiring practices, and discrimination policies ready for me by Monday morning. This ends today. His chief operations officer, Thomas Burke, a black man who'd fought his way up through the ranks, said quietly, "With all due respect, sir, this should have ended years ago. We've had complaints about Jessica Parker before. We've had reports of discriminatory behavior. And nothing was done." The room went silent. Thomas continued, "If we're going to fix this, we need to acknowledge that it's not just about one bad flight attendant. It's about a system that allowed her to behave this way for years without consequences." Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. And that changes now. Thomas, I want you to lead the investigation. I want every complaint we've ever received about discrimination reviewed. I want new policies drafted. I want mandatory training for every single employee. And I want accountability." While this was happening, the plane was making its descent into Atlanta. Maya was in the cockpit with Captain Amanda, sitting in the observer seat, watching the lights of Atlanta get closer. Amanda was explaining how the instruments worked, how they navigated, how they communicated with air traffic control. And for a few minutes, Maya forgot about everything that had happened and just felt like a kid on an adventure. Amanda looked at this brilliant little girl and made a decision. "Maya, have you ever thought about being a pilot?" Maya shook her head. "I want to be a scientist. Like my project." Amanda smiled. "You know, you could be both. I know plenty of pilots with science degrees. The sky's not the limit anymore. It's just the beginning." Maya touched her father's dog tags and smiled. "My dad would have liked you." Amanda's voice was soft. "I would have liked him too. He clearly raised a brave, strong daughter." The plane touched down smoothly, and the passengers applauded again, this time for the landing and for Amanda's handling of the entire situation. As they taxied to the gate, Maya could see through the cockpit windows. There were news vans. Lots of them. Cameras. Crowds of people. And standing at the gate window, dressed impeccably and radiating power, was her grandmother. Margaret Williams stood with her arms crossed, watching the plane pull up to the gate, and her expression was a mix of relief and cold fury. Relief that her grandbaby was about to be safe in her arms. Fury at what that baby had endured. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. And before the door even opened, 2 corporate executives in expensive suits boarded the aircraft. Linda Vasquez, the VP of Customer Relations, and Thomas Burke, the Chief Operations Officer, walked straight to Maya's seat. Other passengers watched in silence. Linda knelt down. Miss Williams, on behalf of this entire airline, I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for what happened to you today. What you experienced was wrong, it was illegal, and it will never happen again. Thomas added, we've arranged for a private escort off the plane, and we'd like to speak with you and your family if you're willing. Before Maya could answer, the door opened and Margaret Williams walked onto that plane like she owned it. She wasn't tall, but she didn't need to be. She carried herself with such dignity and authority that people instinctively stepped aside. Maya, baby, come here. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and ran into her grandmother's arms, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt truly safe. She buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder and cried, really cried, all the tears she'd been holding back. Margaret held her granddaughter and looked over her head at Linda and Thomas. Her voice was measured but hard as steel. We will speak. But not here and not now. Right now, I'm taking my granddaughter somewhere private where she can decompress from the trauma you allowed her to experience. Linda nodded quickly. Of course, Your Honor. We have a private lounge prepared whenever you're ready. As they prepared to leave, the passengers started approaching Maya. Marcus Thompson handed his business card to Margaret. Ma'am, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. This young lady showed more courage today than most adults ever will. Patricia Morrison kissed Maya's forehead, tears in her eyes. You changed something today, sweet girl. You really did. Robert Chin gave Margaret his card as well. I'm an attorney, and I'd be honored to represent Maya pro bono if you decide to pursue legal action. And Brad Newcomb, still streaming to his millions of viewers, said, Maya, you're a hero. The whole world saw what happened, and the whole world is on your side. Even some of the passengers who'd stayed silent earlier approached to apologize. A middle-aged white woman, tears streaming down her face, said, I'm so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I was a coward and you deserved better. Maya, still in her grandmother's arms, was overwhelmed by it all. But there was one person who didn't approach. Jessica Parker was being escorted off the plane by security, her head down, her employee badge already confiscated. Passengers recognized her as she walked past, and the looks they gave her were withering. Some took pictures. Some shook their heads in disgust. One person spat out, shame on you. Jessica kept her head down and walked faster, but she could feel the weight of what she'd done crushing her with every step. Margaret led Maya off the plane, flanked by Linda and Thomas, with security creating a buffer from the cameras and reporters waiting in the terminal. They went straight to a private VIP lounge, away from the chaos. Inside the lounge, Margaret sat Maya down on a plush couch and just held her for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and set up a video call. Aisha's face appeared on the screen, still in her scrubs, her eyes red from crying. Baby. Oh my baby, are you okay? Maya nodded, but fresh tears started falling. Mama, it was so bad. She was so mean to me and I didn't do anything wrong. Aisha's voice cracked. I know, baby. I know you didn't. And Mama's coming, okay? I'm getting on a plane right now. I'll be there in a few hours. Margaret stepped in. Aisha, she's safe now. She's with me. And these airline executives want to talk to us. Linda and Thomas had been standing respectfully to the side, but now they stepped forward, visible on the video call. Linda spoke first. Dr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, Maya, we cannot begin to express how sorry we are. We've already suspended Jessica Parker pending a full investigation, but we want to be clear that this is about real accountability, not just optics. Thomas added, we're implementing immediate changes. Mandatory bias training for all staff, an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and a complete overhaul of our incident reporting system. Margaret's voice was sharp. That's a start. But Maya deserves a personal response, not just corporate policy changes. Linda nodded. We'd like to offer a full refund, free flights for your family for a year, and a $50,000 educational scholarship for Maya. The room went quiet. That was a substantial offer. But Maya, wise beyond her years, spoke up softly. I don't want money. I just want to make sure no other kid goes through what I went through today. Linda and Thomas exchanged glances, both genuinely moved. Thomas said, Miss Williams, that's incredibly mature and generous. And we promise you we're going to make sure that happens. Margaret looked at her granddaughter with pride shining in her eyes. She gets that from her grandfather. The conversation continued for another hour, with lawyers joining via phone, with commitments being made and documented, with the foundation being laid for real, systemic change. But while they were meeting, Jessica Parker was in the airline's HR office, and her world was falling apart. The director of human resources sat across from her, flanked by the legal team and her union representative. The director's face was grim. Ms. Parker, after reviewing the video evidence, passenger statements, and the captain's report, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. Jessica's face crumpled. Please. I've given 20 years to this company. 20 years. The director's voice was firm. And in one flight, you've created a massive liability, damaged our reputation irreparably, and violated multiple company policies and federal laws. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her face. It wasn't. I didn't mean. I was just having a bad day. Her union rep shifted uncomfortably. We'll review options for appeal, but I have to be honest with you, Jessica. The video evidence is damning. What you said, what you did, there's no defending it. The legal team member added, Ms. Parker, you should be aware that the family may pursue legal action. We strongly suggest you retain an attorney. Jessica's voice rose to a wail. I can't afford an attorney. I can't afford anything. My ex-husband took everything in the divorce, and now I don't even have a job. What am I supposed to do? The HR director's voice softened slightly but remained firm. Perhaps you should use this as an opportunity for reflection and growth. What you did today wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior that revealed some deep-seated biases that you need to address. Jessica was escorted from the building, her entire career boxed up in a single cardboard box. News cameras caught her leaving, and she had to cover her face with her jacket to avoid being photographed. Reporters shouted questions. Miss Parker, do you have any comment on the incident? Do you regret what you did? What do you have to say to Maya Williams? Jessica said nothing. She got into her car and drove away, and the weight of what she'd done finally truly hit her. She'd become someone she didn't recognize. Someone mean and bitter and cruel. Somewhere along the way, between the divorce and the disappointments and the resentments, she'd lost herself. And in losing herself, she'd hurt an innocent child. That night, alone in her apartment, Jessica scrolled through the comments on the viral video. The hate messages were brutal. Death threats. People promising to make sure she never worked again. People calling her every ugly name in the book. Her ex-husband called. The kids saw the video, Jessica. They're devastated. They don't understand how their mother could do something like that. Jessica sobbed into the phone. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them Mommy made a terrible, terrible mistake. Her own mother called, disappointment heavy in her voice. Jessica, and how could you? I didn't raise you to treat people like that. Jessica couldn't answer. She looked at a photo on her shelf, taken 20 years ago when she'd first started flying. She looked so young in that picture, so hopeful, so kind. When had she stopped being that person? But while Jessica was hitting rock bottom, something else was happening. The video wasn't just going viral. It was sparking a movement. Other airline passengers started sharing their own stories of discrimination. Black families posting about being removed from flights for suspicious behavior that amounted to speaking in a normal tone of voice. Latino passengers describing being asked for extra identification. Muslim women talking about being subjected to additional screenings. The stories poured in by the thousands. And people who'd never experienced it began to understand the reality that millions of people lived with every single day. Airlines across the industry started making statements, promising reviews of their policies. Some were genuine. Some were just trying to get ahead of their own potential scandals. Civil rights organizations seized the moment, calling for federal regulations around discrimination in air travel. Lawyers started preparing class action lawsuits. Politicians started drafting bills. One little girl's courage on one flight was changing an entire industry. The next day, Maya stood on stage at the youth science competition. She was still shaken from everything that had happened, but she was determined. Her father had taught her to finish what she started, no matter how hard it got. Her project was on bias in artificial intelligence, how computers learn discrimination from the data they're fed, how algorithms can perpetuate racism without anyone intending them to. She'd been working on it for months, but now it had a new resonance, a new urgency. She presented to the judges, her voice strong and clear, and she tied it directly to her experience. Just like people, computers can learn to discriminate. They learn from the data we give them, and if that data reflects our biases, the computers will too. But here's the thing. We can teach them better. We can give them better data, better examples, better training. Just like we can teach people to be better. To see each other as individuals, not stereotypes. To question their assumptions. To choose kindness over bias. The auditorium was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then everyone was on their feet, giving this 9-year-old girl a standing ovation. Maya won first place. Of course she did. The news cameras were there, and a reporter approached her afterward. Maya, how do you feel after everything that happened on your flight here? Maya thought for a moment, then said, I feel like my dad would be proud. He always said to stand up even when your knees shake. My knees were shaking yesterday. But I stood up anyway. The reporter was visibly emotional. What do you want people to learn from your story? Maya looked directly into the camera. That kids matter. Our voices matter. And standing up for yourself isn't being difficult. It's being human. In the weeks that followed, the changes started happening. The airline implemented new policies nationwide. An independent discrimination hotline. Body cameras for flight attendants in a pilot program. Quarterly bias training for all employees. Fast-track diversity hiring initiatives. A complete overhaul of their complaint investigation process. Other airlines, facing competitive pressure and public scrutiny, followed suit. What started with one airline became an industry-wide transformation. Thomas Burke was promoted to CEO after Richard Hartman stepped down. His first action as CEO was to create the Margaret Williams Foundation for Youth Empowerment, funded by the airline with an initial endowment of $5 million. 3 months after the incident, there was an industry panel discussion on discrimination in aviation. Captain Amanda Rodriguez was invited to speak, and she stood at the podium and said, "One child's courage changed an entire industry. But we can't let that be the end of the story. We have to make sure her courage leads to lasting change." The panel included airline executives, civil rights leaders, federal regulators, and passengers who'd experienced discrimination. And sitting in the front row, taking notes for a report she was writing for school, was Margaret Williams. Maya had become a youth advocate for anti-discrimination. She spoke at schools and conferences. She testified before a congressional committee. She was interviewed on national news programs. Her message was always the same: you don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be brave. Oprah interviewed her and asked, "What do you want people to learn from your story?" Maya, now 10 years old but somehow seeming much older, said, "That we all deserve dignity. It doesn't matter if you're in first class or coach, if you're 9 or 90, if you're black or white or brown. We're all human beings and we all deserve to be treated with respect. And if you see someone being treated badly, don't just watch. Say something. Do something. Be brave for someone else the way those passengers were brave for me." She used her scholarship money to start a nonprofit called First Class for All, which helped underprivileged kids experience travel. In the first year, they sent 500 kids on trips they never could have afforded otherwise. Kids from inner cities visiting museums, historical sites, national parks, experiencing new cultures and expanding their worlds. Parents wrote testimonials that brought Margaret to tears. "My son had never left our neighborhood. This changed his entire perspective on what's possible. My daughter saw the ocean for the first time and came back talking about becoming a marine biologist. You gave my child wings." Maya received humanitarian awards. She was named one of Time magazine's most influential young people. Universities were already reaching out, offering her full scholarships years before she'd even apply. But through it all, she remained humble. She deflected praise to the passengers who'd stood up for her. She credited her mother and grandmother for teaching her strength. She honored her father's memory in every speech. Marcus Thompson, inspired by Maya, started a diversity initiative at his tech company. Robert Chin took on more pro bono discrimination cases. Patricia Morrison came out of retirement to teach a course on civil rights to young teachers. Brad Newcomb used his massive platform for social justice causes, and his following grew to millions. Even Captain Amanda Rodriguez became a mentor to Maya, inviting her to aviation camps, teaching her about flight, encouraging her to dream big. Stephanie, the junior flight attendant who'd witnessed everything, became a whistleblower. She came forward with documentation of other discriminatory incidents that had been swept under the rug. She testified in depositions. She helped expose the systemic nature of the problem. And she became an advocate for changing the culture from within. But what about Jessica Parker? 6 months after the incident, Jessica was a different person. Not because of public pressure or legal consequences, but because she'd been forced to confront herself. She'd enrolled in therapy. She'd joined anti-racism workshops. She'd started volunteering at a nonprofit that helped underprivileged youth. The work was hard, low-paying, and humbling. But it was necessary. She read every book she could find on bias, discrimination, and systemic racism. She listened to podcasts. She attended support groups. She did the painful, difficult work of examining her own beliefs and assumptions. One day, sitting in her therapist's office, she broke down completely. I don't understand how I became that person. I don't recognize myself in that video. How did I get so angry and bitter that I could hurt a child? Her therapist said gently, "You're asking the right questions. The next step is making sure you never forget the answers." Jessica wrote a letter to Maya. She sent it through lawyers with no expectation of a response, no desire for forgiveness or redemption, just a need to acknowledge the harm she'd caused. "Maya, I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to forgive me. What I did to you was inexcusable. I let my own pain and bitterness turn me into someone cruel, and you paid the price for my failings. I'm writing this not to make myself feel better, but because you deserve to know that I understand what I did was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. I'm working to be better. Not for praise or recognition, but because I never want to hurt another person the way I hurt you. I hope you continue to shine brightly and change the world. You already changed mine." Maya showed the letter to her mother and grandmother. Margaret's response was immediate. "You don't owe her anything. Not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, nothing." But Maya, holding her father's dog tags, said quietly, "Dad used to say everyone deserves a chance to grow." Aisha pulled her daughter close. "Baby, forgiveness is your choice and yours alone. No one can tell you what to do with it." Maya thought for a long time. Then she wrote back just one line, "I hope you find peace. And I hope you use your experience to help others learn." Jessica received that response and cried for hours. Not tears of relief or absolution, but tears of gratitude that this child she'd hurt had more grace in her little finger than Jessica had in her entire body. Jessica didn't publicize her volunteer work. She didn't seek redemption through media appearances or public apologies. She just quietly showed up at the youth center in a predominantly black neighborhood, helping kids with homework, listening to their stories, learning to see them as the complex, brilliant individuals they were. 1 year after the incident, Maya boarded a plane on the same route. Chicago to Atlanta. Same airline even. This time she was flying with her mother and grandmother. First class, of course. But this time it felt different. The flight attendant who greeted them was a young black woman named Keisha. She smiled warmly and said, "Welcome aboard. It's truly an honor to have you flying with us today, Miss Williams." Maya, humble as always, said, "Thank you. What's your name?" Keisha's eyes sparkled. "I'm Keisha. And I actually applied to work for this airline because of you. Your story inspired me to believe I could belong in this industry." Maya smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I'm so glad you're here." Captain Amanda Rodriguez was flying the plane again, and she stopped by to say hello. "Hey kiddo. Ready for another cockpit tour?" Maya's eyes lit up. "Yes." In the cockpit, sitting in the captain's seat while the plane was still at the gate, Maya felt something shift. Amanda was showing her the instruments, explaining the flight plan, treating her like a colleague instead of a child. Amanda said, "You know, Maya, you could do this someday. You could be sitting in this seat for real." Maya grinned. "Maybe. I still want to be a scientist. But maybe I could be both." Amanda laughed. "With your courage and determination, you can be anything you want." The flight was smooth and uneventful, which was exactly how it should have been. Maya did her homework, read a book, and watched the clouds go by. Normal. Peaceful. The way flying should always be for everyone. Meanwhile, a major streaming service released a documentary called Flight 447, A Child Stand for Justice. It featured interviews with everyone involved except Jessica, who had declined to participate. The documentary explored not just what happened on that flight, but the broader context of discrimination in America, the changes that followed, and the ripple effects of one child's courage. Maya watched it with her classmates at school, and her teacher led a discussion afterward about bias, discrimination, and the importance of standing up for what's right. One of her classmates said, I didn't know kids could make such a big difference. Maya smiled. We can. We just have to try. The First Class for All Foundation continued to grow. By the end of the first year, they partnered with airlines, hotels, and educational institutions. They'd created a whole program that didn't just give kids flights, but entire transformative experiences. At the Foundation's first annual award ceremony, Maya gave a speech that would be replayed millions of times. Travel teaches us that people everywhere are just people. When we experience the world, we learn to see each other as human. That's how we end discrimination. Not through laws alone, though those matter. Not through policies alone, though those help. But through connection. Through understanding. Through seeing each other's humanity. One flight, one experience, one open mind at a time. The audience gave her a standing ovation. There were politicians in that audience, CEOs, civil rights leaders, celebrities. And they were all on their feet for a 10-year-old girl who'd had the courage to stand up when it mattered most. 2 years after the incident, Maya and her mother and grandmother visited her father's grave. Maya placed flowers and the medal from her latest science competition on the headstone. She touched the engraved name and whispered, "Dad, I hope I made you proud. I tried to stand up like you taught me." Aisha put her arm around her daughter. "Baby, he's beyond proud. We all are." Margaret added, "Your grandfather used to say, justice isn't given, it's demanded by the brave. You demanded justice, sweet girl. And you got it." Maya smiled through her tears. "I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just trying to be treated fairly." Aisha pulled her close. "That's exactly what bravery is, baby. Standing up when it's hard. Demanding your dignity when others try to take it. Your father knew that. And now the whole world knows it too." They stood there together, 3 generations of strong black women, honoring the man who'd taught them all about courage. The impact of Maya's story continued to ripple outward. Statistics showed airline discrimination complaints had dropped by 40% industry-wide. The First Class for All Foundation served over 1,000 kids in its second year. 27 states had adopted new anti-discrimination training requirements for transportation workers. But more than the statistics, more than the policy changes, something had shifted in the culture. People were more willing to speak up when they saw injustice. Bystanders were becoming upstanders. The passengers who'd sat silently on other flights started finding their voices. Maya, now 11 years old, was invited to speak at the United Nations about children's rights and dignity. She stood at that podium, looking out at representatives from countries around the world, and she told her story again. But she ended it differently this time. "What happened to me on that flight could have broken me. It could have made me afraid, made me small, made me doubt my worth. But instead, it taught me something important. It taught me that my voice matters. That standing up for myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And that when we stand up for ourselves, we often end up standing up for others too." There are millions of children around the world who face discrimination every day. In schools, in public spaces, in their own neighborhoods. Children who are told they don't belong, that they're not good enough, that they should be quiet and accept less than they deserve. I want every single one of those children to know something. You belong. You matter. Your voice is important. And you have the power to change things even when adults say you can't. Change doesn't always come from the people with the most power or the loudest voices. Sometimes it comes from a 9-year-old girl who just wanted to be treated fairly. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people doing the extraordinary thing of standing up for what's right. Sometimes it comes from all of us, choosing courage over comfort, justice over silence. The assembly hall erupted in applause. Diplomats and world leaders were on their feet, and some were wiping away tears. That night, lying in bed in her hotel room with her mother sleeping nearby, Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. There were thousands of them. Kids from around the world telling her their own stories, thanking her for giving them courage, promising to stand up too. A girl from India who'd been discriminated against for her caste. A boy from Brazil who'd been bullied for his skin color. A child from Australia with a disability who'd been told they couldn't participate. A teenager from South Africa who'd been excluded for their identity. Maya couldn't respond to them all, but she read every single one. And she made a promise to herself that she'd keep telling her story, keep fighting for change, keep being brave for as long as it took. 3 years after the incident, Maya was 13 and entering high school. She'd continued to excel in science, winning competitions, earning recognition, building toward the future she wanted. But she'd also become something else. A symbol. A reminder that courage doesn't have an age requirement, that justice can come from the most unexpected places, that one person really can make a difference. The airline that had failed her so badly had transformed itself. They'd hired a chief diversity officer, implemented comprehensive training programs, created accountability systems that actually worked. They'd partnered with civil rights organizations. They'd made their data on discrimination complaints public, holding themselves accountable. Were they perfect? No. But they were better. Measurably, demonstrably better. Other companies had followed suit. The incident had become a case study in business schools about the cost of discrimination and the value of doing the right thing. It was taught in law schools as an example of civil rights in action. It was discussed in sociology courses as a watershed moment in the ongoing fight for equality. And at the center of it all was a young girl who just wanted to visit her grandmother. On the 4th anniversary of the incident, a reporter asked Maya, "Do you ever regret what happened? Do you wish you'd just stayed quiet and avoided all of this?" Maya didn't hesitate. No. What happened to me was wrong, and staying quiet wouldn't have made it right. It would have just made it invisible. And invisible injustice is still injustice. My father taught me that silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of wrong. So no, I don't regret speaking up. I only regret that I had to. The documentary about her story had won an Emmy. Her foundation had helped thousands of kids. The policy changes she'd inspired had protected countless passengers. Her voice had mattered. Her courage had counted. But when Maya looked back on that day, on that flight, what she remembered most wasn't the fame or the awards or the changes. It was the moment in the cockpit with Captain Amanda, when she'd first believed that maybe, just maybe, she could fly. Now, at 13, Maya was enrolled in a youth aviation program. She was learning to fly actual planes. She was studying aerospace engineering. She was still pursuing science, but she'd added another dream to her list. Because Captain Amanda had been right. The sky wasn't the limit. It was just the beginning. And Maya Williams, the little girl who'd refused to be silenced, who'd stood up when her knees were shaking, who demanded her dignity in the face of discrimination, was just getting started. Her father's dog tags still hung around her neck, close to her heart. And sometimes, when she was in the air looking down at the world below, she swore she could feel him there with her. Proud. Present. Protecting her still. Stand up even when your knees shake. She'd done that. She was still doing it. And she'd keep doing it for the rest of her life. Because some lessons once learned become part of who you are. Some moments of courage define not just a single flight, but an entire lifetime. Some stories, once told, echo forward into eternity. This is one of those stories. Maya Williams boarded a plane as a 9-year-old girl excited about a science competition. She left it as a symbol of courage, a catalyst for change, a reminder that injustice unchallenged is injustice endorsed. They tried to silence her because she was small, because she was young, because of the color of her skin. But she refused to be silenced. She stood tall when they tried to make her small. She spoke up when they wanted her quiet. She demanded her dignity when they tried to deny it. And in doing so, she changed everything. For every child who has ever been told they don't belong, Maya's story says, "You do belong." For every person who has faced discrimination and wondered if speaking up would matter, her story says, "It matters." For every bystander who has witnessed injustice and stayed silent, her story says, "Your voice could change everything." We all have a choice. We can watch injustice happen and tell ourselves it's not our problem. Or we can be like Marcus Thompson, Patricia Morrison, Robert Chin, and Brad Newcomb. We can stand up. We can speak out. We can be brave for someone else. Because at the end of the day, that's what changes the world. Not grand gestures from powerful people, but ordinary people choosing courage in ordinary moments. A businessman who refused to mind his own business. A retired teacher who remembered why she'd fought for civil rights in the first place. A lawyer who saw injustice and couldn't ignore it. An influencer who used his platform for something that mattered. And a 9-year-old girl who, in the face of cruelty and discrimination, stood up and said, "I belong here." She did belong there. She belonged in first class. She belonged in the science competition. She belonged in the cockpit. She belonged anywhere she chose to be. Just like you do. Just like we all do. First class, coach, or anywhere in between. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve respect. We all deserve to be seen as the full, complex human beings we are. That's the lesson of Maya Williams. That's the legacy of Flight 447. That's the truth that echoes forward from one child's courage to every person who hears this story. Your voice matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Your courage, even when your knees are shaking, can change the world. Stand up. Speak out. Be brave. Because you never know when your moment of courage might be the one that changes everything. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it inspired you to be braver, to stand up more, to see others more clearly, then share it. Subscribe to this channel because these are the stories that matter. These are the truths that need to be told. These are the voices that deserve to be heard. And remember, the next time you see injustice, the next time you witness someone being treated as less than they are, the next time you have the opportunity to be brave for someone else, remember Maya Williams. Remember the little girl who refused to be silenced. And find your own courage to do the same.